established nonprofit that located in the city of Riverside and have been providing services to the Riverside County community since 1966. The Nonprofit Resource Center's goal is professional development and leadership opportunities for nonprofits throughout Riverside County. We have a plethora of services. We are a member-based organization, similar to the Chamber, that if you join and become a member of the Resource Center, you get benefits such as discounts to workshops and free entrance to networking mixers, the opportunity to come to our funder panels that happen quarterly where funders will come out and speak to the public about their giving and grant making, as well as a plethora of other services that we offer. Today we are having our basics and essentials of grant writing with Melissa Deals, and just a little bit about Melissa before I turn it over. She is the owner of a grant writing consulting organization called Written for You, and she provides grant writing and research services to nonprofit organizations. She does have a degree from Cal State Fullerton in communications and has more than 10 years of writing and editing experience. She's been a Resource Center consultant for close to 5 years now and has done lots of work with small to mid-sized to large nonprofits, has just a plethora of talent. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Melissa and put myself on mute. So Melissa, thank you so much for hosting today, and I'm turning it over to you now.
Sounds good. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Melissa Deals, and I am the facilitator for today. We're covering Grant Writing 101. And you'll see my information, my contact information is on this front screen, as well as Danielle Ross's contact information that you will have access to on the PowerPoint slides that you'll receive after today's seminar. So you'll have that for future reference to be able to contact us. So today what we're going to be covering is, like Tyra said, this is a very generic and basic overview of grant writing. We're going to just be identifying some basics. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of writing and repeat applications and things like that. That is the second level course. So when I am approaching this course, I am assuming that you know grants exist, but that's about it. That you need an education in fully understanding what they are, where to find them, and a basic beginning of how to begin applying for them. I'm also going to be coming from the understanding that you are all with nonprofit organizations. I did see a listing of the different types of organizations that are here, so that gives me an idea of how to frame examples and things like that. I do want to remind everybody to type questions in on the box. I do have my control panel slid over so that I can see the screen as you have, but as we get to the end of the course, we will be having in-depth Q&A. For those who are listening in the future by recording, those will also be recorded, so I will read the question and then give the answer. So again, for covering the course here, we're going to be identifying all of the documents that you need to apply for grant applications. We're going to learn about the different types of grants available and learn how to research potential funders, and then we're going to cover the basic content of what needs to be included in a grant application and in the letter of inquiry. So we are going to begin with grant money. What is it? You know, working in the nonprofit realm, there are so many times that I get asked the question of someone who is not involved in a nonprofit. They'll come up to me and they'll have this great idea because they heard of somebody who got a grant for $500,000 to do some random task. And so they think, well, I have an idea. There has to be a grant out there for me, so can't I get it? And so we're going to kind of talk in a little greater detail about what grant money really is. And I think all of you are coming from the realm of being in the nonprofit industry. And so there is a basic understanding that there has to be a public benefit in order for grant monies to really be applicable. There are times when grant money can be used for for-profit organizations, but that tends to be more the exception than the rule, and most of those monies are coming in a way that maybe there's a public benefit. So maybe funding a public study on new research techniques or treatments for cancer that ultimately would have a public benefit, but that maybe a private organization is going to head up that research study. But for the most part, grant money is utilized by nonprofits for public benefit, and that can range in any capacity, from animal services to social services to human services, education, domestic violence services, anything that is benefiting the public at large. And in this class, I'm hoping that you will understand how to find those organizations that are giving out the money and how to apply for them. But one of the biggest things that I find in helping organizations be able to find and apply for money is what you need to do before you start researching and writing, and that is to get your organization prepared. And in order to do that, you have to understand the different types of support that's available and just have a basic kind of working vocabulary of the terms and the way that funders are describing the different types of support that is available. It's not just listed as ABC Foundation gives a grant, and that's all that's listed. You know, ABC Foundation may be supporting 5 or 6 different types of grants, and you need to be able to understand what those are so that you can best fit your organization into what it is that the funder is looking to fund. The other thing is have a clear mission statement and activities. So many times with organizations, they have a passion for what they do, but they don't have a clear mission. And we will touch on this a little bit later, but I'm going to say it twice because I think it's really important. Your activities should be the result of your mission statement. And if your activities aren't accomplishing what your mission says, it needs to change. So for instance, if you are a food bank and your mission statement is to feed the hungry of Riverside County, one of your projects should not be job search and resume prep. That seems unusual, and I'll explain that because you want your activities to be a direct result of your mission statement. So if you want to be including maybe job search, job prep, and resume prep to people that you are serving with food, that mission statement has to change. It has to better reflect what you're really doing. And if you've progressed as an agency and discovered that having those services in addition to the food bank is of benefit and it's where the organization wants to go, you need to consider changing up that mission statement to make it clear. Maybe in serving the indigent population of Riverside County with basic needs and job search readiness. Something that encompasses both of your projects. And if you don't want to change your mission statement, truly look at your activities and your programs and make sure that they're accomplishing that mission statement. Another item to consider when you're preparing documents and getting ready to research and look at grants is to prepare solid operating and project budgets along with financial documents. This seems like an odd thing to think about when you're coming at grant writing. You think, well, I'm writing. What difference does this make? Well, the difference is going to be made because it's going to be asked in the application. And unfortunately, as the person who's responsible for submitting the grants, you're the one that really cares about this. So I find most of the time, especially with smaller organizations, that the grant writers really have to be a part of pulling these things together and helping develop these things, especially when it comes to project budgets. So many times a project budget is something that you want to implement, but that you don't have any historical records on. So if you want to, maybe you are an agency that provides senior services for senior citizens, and you're going to be wanting to add transportation to the list of services that you're providing to senior citizens. And so you're going to be writing a grant to ask for a vehicle to be able to, provide transportation for seniors, maybe to doctor's appointments and grocery shopping and things like that. You're not going to have any historical knowledge of how much your organization has spent on that. And so it's going to be thinking through, okay, what would this project cost us? And many times the idea comes to the grant writer, and then the rest is left for the grant writer to resolve. And so it's kind of a best educated guess on how much, how much is the vehicle going to cost? How much is the insurance going to cost? The gasoline to fund it, the staffing to drive it, the wear and tear, maintenance, things like that. Putting all those things together and what's the cost to the organization going to be for the year, and that's going to be how you develop a project budget. And I find, particularly in my role in preparing grants for organizations, that I'm involved in that far more often than I would think, because the idea comes to me but not the details. And so we'll talk a bit more in detail about that. The other thing is to also be prepared to clearly define your projects and goals, and consider long-term program sustainability. And in a nutshell, what that really means is, how's your program going to live on after the grant? And we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit greater detail as we continue on. So the different types of supports, there are many more than I have listed here. These are just some of the more common, and that as you're beginning out in grant writing, these are the types of support that you're going to be submitting applications on. General operating support is obviously the cleanest support, and it's the one that everybody wants, but it's also the hardest to get. There has been a trend with the economy over the past couple of years that general operating support is becoming more common, but it isn't the most common. And so we're going to define each of these different types. So when you're looking at a funder and they say that they provide maybe general operating support, capital support, and event sponsorships, you have to be able to understand what each of those mean so that you can define how your project best fits in with that. So again, that general operating support, this is the bread and butter of grant writing. This is the best funding you can get, because this is a check that is received by your organization that can be spent on anything that you want to spend it on. It can be spent on operating costs. It can be spent on rent, on program costs, anything. It can be spent for future investments on programs, for development of new programs, anything. Most of the time, in my working with organizations, people use general operating support to fund things that can't really be funded elsewhere. Things like your executive director, the administrative staff, maybe your rent, your utilities, things that are harder to get support for in a grant is where general operating support is best utilized. Seed money. This is going to be anything that's used to start a new project or an organization. Many organizations, many new foundations or new nonprofits think that they have filled out their IRS paperwork, they are ready to go, and now they need seed grant money in order to start their organization. And I will say that while seed money does exist, it's more common to see that seed money be used for a new project for an established organization more often than it is to see the establishment of a new organization. With seed money, if an organization wants to be able to go after seed money, there are other things that have to be in place. And the biggest thing is seed money can't be used to solely fund an organization's operations. The reality that an organization can get started and operate strictly on grants is very naive, and it's not a realistic understanding of how grants can really help your organization. And I think this is a big misconception when it comes to grants and receiving them and writing for them, is that your operations are going to cost $500,000 for the year, and you're going to get a $500,000 seed money, and you're going to have no other sources of funding. I'm going to tell you right here and now that's just rarely going to happen. Most of the time, it is a better plan to plan on a variety of different funds, from maybe an earned revenue, individual donor cultivation, maybe some fundraisers and things like that. And once those are established, to be able to request seed money for a new project for an organization that is established is much easier. I haven't seen much in the way of seed money to fund a new organization in quite some time, especially with the economy the way that it is. Foundations just really are being more careful with their money. And so usually seed money is going to be for funding a new project for an established organization. A matching or a challenge grant, these are great funds, and this is a definite trend in granting right now, is funders wanting to make sure that their funds are well invested. And one of the best ways that they can make sure that their funds are well invested is by saying, yes, we will give you a $10,000 grant if you can go get a $10,000 grant from someone else. And so in a sense, it turns their $10,000 into $20,000. I'm going to give you a real-life example of something that's happened to one of my clients this week, and that is that a science foundation has contacted them saying that they have this opportunity for a matching grant for a computer lab. And the computer labs run at $25,000 for the entire lab. All of the equipment, all of the training, all of the software, everything is inclusive in this price tag. And they are offering those that they have had a funder on their side be willing to match half of that amount if the organization can match the other half. And so what the organization was able to do was take a general operating grant that they had received from a foundation that they've just received in the last few weeks, and they were able to leverage those funds, and they were able to use $12,500 worth of that general operating grant and show, yes, they can, in fact, match the other half of that grant. And so now they're going to be receiving an entire computer lab. And so that's how a matching grant can really help. The real help in this is, it seems like it's more work because now you have to find two funders. But what's really great about it is that a funder can easily say, yes, we will give you $10,000 if you match $10,000. If you don't do it, you don't get the funds. So that is the downside of that funding. But if they're willing to say, yes, we will do that, it gives you leverage with other agencies and other foundations to be able to say, hey, we've got this project. Our total project budget is maybe $25,000. If you're willing to give us 10, another organization has already committed to giving us 10, and we're 3/4 of the way into funding our entire project for the year. It helps your chances with other funders. So this can be a really great form of funding to be able to use. Another one is employee matching grants. I always liken these to the United Way campaigns. This is where you walk into an organization that you're maybe working for, maybe that a board member is a part of or has contacts with. You go in and make presentation to an employee group, and the employer offers to take a paycheck deduction off of the employee's paycheck as the employee has deemed. So maybe the employee says, okay, I'll be willing to give you $5 a month. So the employer puts a paycheck deduction of $5 right on the check, pulls that money off of the paycheck, and collects from all of the employees and then submit the check to your organization for how much that is every month. Many times that's matched by the employer. And so this can be a really great way of establishing long-term support for your organization if you can coordinate an employee matching grant with a corporation mostly, because it doesn't typically change. Once an employee has agreed to give you $5 a month or $5 a week or whatever it is, it doesn't typically change unless the employee leaves. So it can really build a nice revenue stream for your organization. And capital support. This one is always a little tricky, and it's basically used for large one-time purposes. So it can be used for maybe building an endowment or establishing an endowment. Something that's going to happen once is always how I tell my clients. It's a one-time event. So maybe you are renovating a building or building a new building, or a lot of times large equipment purchases are going to come in here. So this is where like vehicles, maybe large expensive copy machines or hardware, computer systems, things like that. It's more than I need a laptop. It's our office needs an entire technology infrastructure, consisting of maybe 8 laptops, a connected network, a server, and all the software to go with it. That would be a type of a capital support type of a project. Program development. We're going to talk about this one in project support. I have to tell you off the bat, it depends on how the funder sees these, to where technical terms could be confusing here. Typically for program development, it is the expansion of projects. It's a project that's already established being developed even further. So for instance, maybe you currently serve 100 people a month providing mentoring services to youth. And through program development, you want to be able to offer mentoring services and an after-school program providing recreation. It's taking your program and deepening it, making it more than it currently is, or serving more than you currently do. Project support is typically just to continue a project that you're already working on. Sometimes it's to expand. Sometimes it's just to stay the same. There's a big, I always consider it to be kind of a double standard in the grant world, and that is that so many nonprofits are just struggling to survive. They're just struggling to make ends meet and continue supporting all the people that they support now. So if you're serving 500 people a month, it's a challenge just to be able to serve those 500 people a month. And so many funders wanting to see how many more are you going to be able to support with funding from us. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because it's great to be able to have funding to serve more, but with funding so down and giving so down, it is so much harder for nonprofits to recruit and get as many donations as they need to survive. It can be a little tricky. And so these two terms, project support and project development, they somewhat go hand in hand. It really depends on the funder and how they're defining it. Sometimes a new project will be considered for a foundation under program development. Sometimes it's under project support. And so when we get later in the seminar and we're talking about preparing a list of questions for a foundation, we'll talk about how we can clarify this a little bit later. But just keep in mind that this is the basic understanding of these two types of support, and then a funder will have to give the final clarification. The next type is event sponsorship. No one ever thinks of these as grants, but they really are grants, and they can be requested of mostly corporations, sometimes of foundations, to help underwrite the costs of events. So maybe it's an outreach event that's not really intended to make any money, but if you can underwrite the cost of the event for your organization, it can really help the organization because you're not using any of your unrestricted funds or your operating funds to cover the cost of the event. It can also be used as fundraising events, maybe for large fundraisers, silent auctions, things like that. Those events can be very expensive for a nonprofit to put on, but because of the amount of funds that are raised through those times, you don't want to stop doing them, and so you can request for event sponsorship. Sometimes this type of support can come in the form of cash. Other times it can come in the form of in-kind donations. So maybe covering beverages or covering facility rentals or covering food. Those can be major types of support that aren't necessarily cash, but that can really be beneficial to an organization. So that kind of covers the different types of support that you're going to see when you're looking at a funder, to be able to decide which one is best for me, to be able to have that understanding is important. The next thing is some of the things that you need to do internally. And again, we talked about that mission statement. You really want to make sure that it's crystal clear, that it defines what you do and who you are. I always love it when I see mission statements and vision statements separately. Sometimes you'll see a mission statement that's 2 or 3, 4 sentences long, and by the time you get to the end, you kind of say, wait, what was that? What is it that they do? But to have a really concise and simple mission statement that's very simple and very easy to understand, defining who you serve, where you serve, and why you serve. It can be very helpful. And then also, if it becomes too long, consider a vision statement, something that explains in more detail that your vision statement kind of defines the who you serve, the where you serve, and the why you serve. The vision statement can kind of express what you intend and hope for providing these services will long-term accomplish. And make sure that your core programs and projects directly link to your mission statement. Again, that food bank. If you are a food bank and your mission statement is to provide food to Riverside County residents, if you're providing other services, maybe after-school care or job prep and placement sort of services, those can be very viable services that could go very hand in hand with the population that is in need of food and struggling with hunger. And it makes perfect sense. But does your mission statement reflect it? And I don't want anyone to take offense to that. But what I want you to understand is that you need to make sure that your mission statement is fully encompassing all of what you do and all of who you intend to serve. And if they don't match, consider tweaking one of them. Maybe your mission statement needs to expand a little bit to show that you're serving a larger population or a larger group or a larger service area than maybe just that food. The other thing is prepare up your list of board of directors. This may seem like a menial task that's not that big of a deal, but you'd be surprised when you are facing with a deadline and you're working and all of a sudden you realize that the organization, the foundation is asking not only for the names of your board of directors, but their affiliations, maybe their elected date, when they term out, and all of a sudden you are scrambling, looking through old minutes and old board meetings to find out what all of those things are. What I always like to do for each of my clients is I have two. I have one that's very simple, just the name and their position on the board. President, vice president, secretary, treasurer, director, that sort of thing. And then the other one I have everything that I can about the board member. I have their name, the date that they were elected, the date that they'll term out, maybe how many terms they're allowed to have, their position, again, for, vice president, president, that sort of thing, and their professional affiliation. Where do they work or what industry are they in? On that list, I don't usually give that list out, so I will not only have the industry, but who they work for, and their title at that company. Sometimes that helps in researching a potential funder to be able to understand that maybe one of your board members is the president of an energy-based company, and maybe there's a connection with a foundation who has a particular energy-based focus. Maybe one of their board members works for a sister company, or they work in coordination with this company, and a connection can be made there. And so the more information that you have, the better off it is for you long term. And if you're preparing these things prior to submitting your application, you're just saving yourself the headache of having to pull it together all within a deadline, because for me it has never failed that when I have made that mistake, half my board's on vacation and I can't get what I need. The other thing I like to have for all my board members is just a paragraph on the expertise that they bring in the position that they're serving on the board. It can really help when you're asked the question of how does your board interact with your organization, and how do they, and what benefits do they bring? If you just have name and title, it's really hard to come up with something concrete. But if you have detailed explanations of what it is that they do, maybe they're really great on helping financially plan and build a strategic plan for the organization. Or maybe they're great when it comes to public awareness and public campaigns and fundraising. And just to be able to see that at a glance and then bring it all together in being able to answer that question. The other item is preparing financial documents. You really want a clear to understand budget. I would start by taking a look at your operating budget and making sure that your income and expenses are properly categorized and estimated. And I'm going to give you an explanation of why I'm saying that. So if you're looking at past budgets and you have, and as the grant writer, you are preparing a budget because you need to submit something for a grant application, and you see that on average your organization is spending $10,000 a year on office supplies or on travel expenses, whatever that category is, and you're preparing your annual budget, and all of a sudden that number is going to go from $10,000 to $50,000, be prepared to explain what that is and make sure that they're reasonably estimated. I understand that in preparing annual budgets and project budgets that a lot of it is dependent upon funding. So it's a very fluid document. But you also want to make sure that it is a good, educated, and researched decision, that it's not just a pie-in-the-sky number that you're pulling out. I understand that there is an element of that in preparing budgets, but you also want to be reasonable. So if office supplies are going from $10,000 to $50,000, why is that? And be prepared to explain that, whether it's good or bad. Maybe you're going from $50,000 to $10,000, and maybe there's a really good explanation because you've found a cheaper source, or you now have in-kind donations, or maybe your service area was cut because another organization came in to specifically cover that area. It could be very realistic and understandable and logical. It could also mean that you've had massive cuts to donations, and be prepared to explain that. Don't be afraid to be honest about the fact that you have not as easily raised funds as you have in the past. Anytime that you have to deliver bad news to a funder in that environment, always be thinking through, why did it happen, what did you learn from it, and how can you prevent it in the past? So if many organizations that I've worked with in the past few years didn't have to do much to raise funds, they would just submit a quick little letter and in came $50,000. And 8 to 10 years ago, that worked just fine. Today, that's not working. Funds are much more harder to come by. They're much more competitive. There are fewer funds to give and more agencies to give to. And so it's a much more competitive market. So things that worked before aren't working now. And if you're simply able to explain that, I have an organization, I'm down in the Murrieta-Temecula area. A lot of their funding came from the housing industry. When the housing industry tanked a few years ago, a lot of their funding dried up. It's a pretty easy thing to explain. You know, their funding and their ability to recruit funding was directly impacted by the housing economy. And so it's not something that they did incorrectly. It's not something they did wrong. It's not that they upset a funder. It's just a reality. Lesson learned from that, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. It was very easy funding to achieve, but it wasn't the smartest move. And so as we explain that to a funder and we explain that we chose to do that and not invest any real resources into fund development, the consequence is that now we're trying to scramble and we're not in a very good position because we don't have a dedicated and established relationships. And so in the future, even as funds come in from, you know, the housing market is starting to make a comeback in our area and more builders are building, which means that their revenue is going to increase from those sources. But it doesn't mean that we can abandon all other sources of funding. And so just be prepared to explain that. Also, in your project budget, consider including a small portion of overhead expenses. Sometimes a funder will allow you a portion of what they call administrative or overhead. And write it in. If they'll allow it, write it in, because it can be used on things that aren't necessarily line items in your budget. Like your executive director, maybe your fund development people, or utilities, rent, things like that. And this is a sample operating budget, and I want you to say, I just got a message here from Kyra. I'm sorry for the interruption. We just want to make sure that everyone is hearing okay and seeing the slides okay. We want to make sure that it's not a group issue and it's just an isolated issue. So if you can see everything and hear everything, can you go ahead and put a message in the chat line to say that you
muted.
All right. Now, I was muted for a minute, so I know that Jeanette just said that she couldn't hear, but I couldn't hear either. I wasn't on. So I think that we're good. I'm going to continue moving on. It looks like it's just a little isolated incident there of technology troubles. So I'm going to keep going. So in talking about that annual budget, if you look at this budget, this is one of my favorite budgets to work with. It makes it really easy to come up with a project budget. And you'll see on the income side that their income is not just lumped at income at $132,000. Their income is broken up into government grants are $25,000, donations are $65,000. But they even go so far to break it up as to foundations, businesses, individuals, and boards. And then the same with earned income. Where is that coming from? Fundraising, fees, advertising, things like that. Makes it really easy in the future when you're asked, well, what percentage of your revenue comes from board donations? Well, when it's broken down like this, it's very easy to give that number. When it's just one big number of $65,000 worth of donations, then you're going to have to constantly be working with an accounting person to get the listing of what those donations are, so that you can answer that question. And this is where having a grant writer be involved a little bit in this stage is really helpful. On the other side, if you look at expenses, you've got it broken down by both administrative and program personnel. And this makes it really easy when you're working on a project budget, is to be able to say, okay, for this, for our main program, we spend $41,950 just on staff that are 100% donated to this program. It's not unreasonable to say that maybe 10% or 20% of the administrative personnel also are dedicated to the program, but to say that 100% of your staffing is dedicated to a program usually isn't realistic. Usually you have someone who's involved in the financial aspect or in the management aspect that's not on the ground working with people. And so it's really nice to have these broken out. And then you can just see that they have the rest of their expenses broken out really nicely. So the other thing that you want to do is make sure that you have the financial statements in order. And when a foundation is asking for financial statements, they'll usually ask for your last fiscal year. And your fiscal year is whatever your year is calculated at. Many nonprofits work on a July 1st to June 30th year, and so their year technically starts July 1st. If that's the case, that's considered your fiscal year. Your fiscal year may run just with the calendar from January 1st to December 31st. And if that's the case, then that's your fiscal year, and that's the time frame in which you're providing these documents. And so when a foundation is asking for maybe last year's fiscal statements, what you're going to want to provide them with is your profit and loss and balance sheet from that last year. So right now, if you do end on June 30th, what you're going to provide, if you're submitting an application today, is you're going to provide a profit and loss and a balance sheet from July 2011 to June 2012. Even though you're almost done, and that seems really, really old, you technically aren't done with your year, and so you can't provide those documents. Now, come the middle of July, just 2 weeks later, you're going to be providing fiscal year documents from July 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2013. And so that's what they're looking for when they're asking for financial statements. Now, they may be asking for an audit or an independent review. And I'm going to explain the difference between all three of those. With financial statements, it's what they call internal review. That's the level, is internal review. And that means that it's your staff that's putting in the information. You may have an outside bookkeeper that is plugging in the information that you give them. But the information is staying internally, and it hasn't really been reviewed by someone else outside of the organization. An independent review is maybe if you have a bookkeeper working on your books, for them to be able to, let's see, if they're not maybe a board member or a staff member, then they can complete the review. Otherwise, you're going to want another agency, someone outside of the agency to do the review. The reason that is you want to remove any possibility that there's any sort of fraud or anything like that happening within your organization. If you have a president who is maybe the sole employee and who does the book, there's no checks and balances in that system. And so you could really say whatever it is that you want to say, and until you're filing your tax returns and the IRS does an audit, there's no real truth to that. There's no real legitimacy to it. But if you were to have a CPA or even a bookkeeper outside of your agency who doesn't have a vested interest in your agency, take a look at your books. What they do is they say, yes, this makes sense. What they're saying on their financial statements, we agree with from what we can see. It just kind of puts a stamp of legitimacy on your agency's financial statements. It is a step below an audit. An audit is the next step, and that is where a CPA firm comes in and they look at every single penny and every single receipt, and they make sure that absolutely everything is in the absolute order and that it is in the right category and that it is perfectly documented. It is the highest level that you can have of your financial records and for your agencies. Most agencies that are smaller and newer come under the requirement of not having to perform an audit. If you don't have to, consider doing it anyways. If you can't afford it because it can be pricey, consider having an independent review. It makes it a lot easier for your agency to recruit grant funds when you have that stamp of legitimacy on your financial statements. It puts more confidence in the foundation into your agency for them to make an investment into your agency. And once you have all of those documents, consider uploading everything, scanning them so that you have them in an electronic format. So many applications now are online, and it makes the process of actually grant writing easier. When you're sitting down, you can concentrate on the writing, and you're not concentrating on how long it's taking you to scan a 100-page document. Do that in a time that you're not in a time limit and on a deadline. And also make sure that you have your 990 form. Your 990 form is the nonprofit's version of a personal tax return. It's what the nonprofit has to turn in to the federal government. And many foundations will ask for it, not all, but many will. So the next thing that you want to do is clearly define your project and your project goals. And so that is, decide what project it is that you're seeking funding for. And again, be prepared to explain why it is of public benefit. I put that in there because all of the agencies that I see on today's seminar are legitimate, established organizations. But so many times it's the new agencies that have just popped up and want to serve, and they think that what they're providing is of public benefit, but it's really not of public benefit. And so just be prepared to explain why your services are of public benefit, what problem or what need within the community your agency serves and resolves. Once you're able to do that, you can also, and you'll need to do this before you find your funder, decide what kind of funding you need. Do you need project support? Do you need just core operating support? Maybe you have recruited all the funds that you need for a particular program, but as an agency, you're not funded for the year. That would be more operational support or general operating support. You also want to set your project goals and your measurement and evaluation criteria. That set of words makes new grant writers a little nervous because you don't know what those things are. And so what your project goals are we're going to go back to that food bank, and that you are providing food services to people within Riverside County. And so your project goal could simply be that you have on average served 500 people a year. So your project goal would be that you are going to serve 500 people in 2013. That's a project goal. It's measurable. It defines how many you're serving, and it also defines in what time frame you are serving. Other project goals could maybe for an after-school mentoring program for youth could result in youth maybe coming up to their grade level if they're behind maybe they're behind a grade from an academic perspective, bringing them up to their current grade level. If you're providing maybe services to women with breast cancer, that you're serving X amount of people, or that you're providing maybe 100 mammograms over the course of a year to women who don't have access to insurance. Those are all different types of project goals. What do you want to achieve? That's what that question is. What is your project goal? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to accomplish? And then when it comes to measurement and evaluation criteria, it's looking at those goals, how are you going to accomplish them? And so, or in what time frame. So for instance, we're gonna go to the at-risk youth. You're providing after-school mentoring and homework assistance. And your goal is that you want to serve 100 kids. That's a very easily measured evaluation criteria because you can easily measure how do you know that you served 100 kids. Well, if you have attendance sheets or sign-in sheets, you can add up how many are on each attendance sheet, and you'll know when you got to 100 kids. You'll know the date that you got to those 100 kids, and you'll know who came. And you'll also be able to see if you have unduplicated services, which means that you are serving 100 different kids. Sometimes that matters, sometimes that doesn't matter. You'll see in times where funders are asking you to define how many unduplicated services you're providing. And so that means that you could be providing homework assistant to the same kid once a week for a year, but they count as one. If you're counting units of service, it's counting as 52 because you are providing a unit of service each week and providing that service to that child, even though it's the same child. So you'll want to kind of keep and categorize both sets of information so that you can report back both ways. Another way that you could, another project goal that you could be measuring is that you want to bring the students up to their academic level. So if maybe they're only reading at a first grade level, but they're in the third grade, pre and post surveys can, if you establish pre and post surveys before services and after services to evaluate the child's reading ability, you can document that they are moving up or they are not moving up and they're staying the same. You can also do it through report card information. You do have to be careful with what you're reporting and what you're collecting. Not all of it's possible for you to collect. And so when you're setting your measurement and evaluation criteria as a grant writer, you don't want to get yourself into trouble by saying that you are going to capture this information if you don't have a way or the ability to capture that information. An agency that I worked for quite some time ago said that they were going to increase by participating in this after-school mentoring program, they were going to increase all student grades by 1 letter grade. And they regretted it from the minute that they said that because they had no real way of capturing that information. The students that came to their program were not dropped off by parents. They had very little involvement or visual, face-to-face contact with parents. They were brought on buses, they left on buses, and so it became really difficult to track that information. And they had staff working for months calling and following up with each set of parents on what their child's grades were. And not all parents were comfortable giving that. And so whatever you set as your measurement and evaluation criteria, make sure that you can provide that information and that your agency can afford to track it in the way that you're saying that you can. And you may need to change how you're reporting that. So maybe instead of saying that you're going to raise students a full grade level, that may be appropriate if you are in a classroom environment and you have access to that information. If you don't, because you're just that after-school mentoring program, you might be able to do that you want to see an improvement in behavior and a decrease in bad behavior. So maybe a decrease in involvement with the juvenile justice system, or a decrease in punishments at school, such as detentions and suspensions. And the way that you're going to collect that information is through self-reporting. And so you would just take a survey of the youth when they begin the program and when they end the program. On average, how many times have you had detention in the last 3 months? Self-reporting is a little easier than trying to capture some of that information. The other thing that you want to do on your project and your project goals is clearly define the population that you're serving and how many people you're serving. So define the geographical region. Is it all of Southern California? And where does that range from? LA to San Diego? Are you serving Riverside County? Are you serving all of Riverside County? Riverside County is a big county. Or are you serving maybe the western half of Riverside County? Maybe you're serving just particular cities. Or maybe you're serving a specific population without regard to geography. So just make sure that you're defining what that is. And I think one of the most important things to be able to do is to be able to explain to a foundation what makes you different and what makes you worthy of the money in comparison to others within your community. Now, I will say this. I am not a fan at all of nonprofit bashing. So if you have another organization that does a very similar thing to you, don't focus on what they do differently that you don't like. There's no need to talk badly about another organization. Simply talk about the differences and what you do differently and that what sets you apart. I don't think that there are plenty of funders out there that specifically fund for your type of agency, and you need to find those agencies. You don't need, it is a competitive market, but there needs to be no bad-mouthing of other agencies. It doesn't reflect well on you. It doesn't leave a good taste in the mouth of a funder, and it doesn't help the overall nonprofit industry when things like that happen. So just, you want to sell yourself for sure, and you believe in your agency, you have a passion for your agency, or you wouldn't be there. And you need to capture that and define what is it that you're doing that is so important, and why is it that you're different from others in the community. Maybe even there's an extra level of service or an extra level of follow-up there that makes your agency a leader within that industry or within that population group, and you need to sell that. So that all being said is all of what has to happen before you begin looking for funders. And I know that that seems like a lot, and that's not what you anticipated when looking for grants. You think, well, I just need to find a grant. I'm just going to find it on the web or find it in the library or wherever you're going to find it and submit an application. And I really encourage you to take a step back and get those other things in order, because once you begin researching and you find a grant and you want to apply for it, that in and of itself is a big job. And if you have all of these things in place, it makes that job a lot easier. So we talked about the different types of funding that's available, and now we're going to talk about the different types of funders. You have foundations. I use sites such as the Foundation Center, GuideStar, some of those that are listed. Some of those are subscription-based search sites, and others are free. I personally have a subscription to the Foundation Center, and therefore I pay each month to be able to use that resource. I believe that you can use that resource at the nonprofit resource center if you make an appointment and go in and be able to use that resource. It used to be available at regional libraries, but it is no longer. And I believe the only way to access it for free at this point is, locally that is through the Nonprofit Resource Center. So you can contact them and they can help you walk through searching for foundations if you don't want to purchase a subscription. Being that I am a freelance grant writer, it's a site that I use almost every time that I work. And so I have a subscription just because it just works for my needs. But they can be great sites for you to be able to do some research on. The Foundation Directory is a publication of the Foundation Center, and they put out a book each year. And sometimes those can be helpful, and I have purchased those in the past. So for instance, I've purchased the Health and Human Services publication, and it'll show you for the entire year what agencies gave funds in that category, who they gave them to, and how much they gave them for. So it can be a good basis for the beginning of research, and you can also simply just have a kind of a one-time cost. They're not that expensive. I want to say $50 or $60 for one category, and it can be a good source at the beginning of your research. So if you're doing a search on something like the Foundation Center, you want to look at once you've found a funder that looks good to you. Maybe you're pulling up Human Services in California. So once you do, look at their mission, see what their funding priorities are. Are you in line with that? Because if you aren't, don't try to manufacture a project that works for them. Move on. Find a funder that works. Find a funder that has the same passion that you do, because it's going to be a much greater investment of your time and of theirs. One other thing that I like to do in using the Foundation Center is to do what I call a reverse search. Now, it's looking at organizations that are like yours but that aren't yours and see who's funding them. So I work with a food bank in Lake Elsinore, and there's also a food bank in Murrieta. And so they are geographically close. I mean, you're talking about less than 20 miles. They roughly serve the same population other than maybe a slight geographical difference. And so I could put in that other organization in Murrieta and see who's funding them. It might give me some good ideas as far as who I might consider requesting funds from, especially if they're, maybe regionally based corporations, things like that. It might give me some good ideas of the types of agencies that are funding in my area for a particular type of service. The other thing I like to do is read through the Foundation's 990 forms to see historically what they've been giving. So many times I'll see on a foundation that they are interested, maybe they're interested in funding animal cruelty programs, prevention programs, and health and human services, AIDS research, and hunger issues. And so you think, oh, okay, well, I'm an animal cruelty prevention program. I'm going to apply for, I want to go after that funder. But when you read their 990 forms, even though they have 4 different areas that they say that they're interested in, if you read their 990 form, 90% of their giving is maybe to AIDS research, where only 10% is split among those other 3 forms of support. And so it gives you an idea of, is this really worth my effort? I believe that you can increase your chances on gaining a positive award on a grant if you're really doing your research on a funder and making sure that they really do fall in line with what your agency says or with what they say that they want to give to. And so that can be really helpful. Again, the reverse search, I believe I have an example here for you. Yes, I do, of doing a reverse search. So this is who you can see who's funding organizations that are similar to yours. And so we've been talking about the food bank, and that's what, as I'm doing research for that food bank in Lake Elsinore, I could put in the food bank in Riverside County. And so I could look here on the Foundation Center. This is their website. I just took a snapshot of it so that we could see it here. And if you'll look down, you'll see the recipient location. I want to know who's receiving grants, the recipients in California, in Riverside County, who is a food bank. And so this is the result that I get. And so when I'm looking at this, I can see, oh, Fish of the Lower Coachella Valley. Well, that's not that far from me. It's not on the other side of the United States. This is giving me some good ideas of where I might consider looking into. I might look into Bank of America or Weingart, Newman's Own, Albertsons, Wells Fargo. There's several funders there that are funding food banks in my region. and I can go and now look at that particular funder and see if they are in fact a good fit. This is the other half the sheet of Second Harvest Food Bank, and there's another batch of funding there. Once you have identified a funder or a foundation, you want to look at their profile. First, make sure that they accept applications. A lot of times foundations will be listed, but they don't necessarily accept applications. They're on an invitation-only basis. If they are on an invitation-only basis, it is not inappropriate to make contact to find out how to receive an invitation. Sometimes it's as simple as a screening phone call for an agency to be able to hear what you do, hear where you are, and be able to say, oh yeah, we do fund in California, and we do fund those types of projects. We'd be happy to send you out an application. In other realms, if applications aren't accepted, it's because they're board directed. If that's the case, that is a different job. That is a different way of approaching funding. It's not where I'd recommend that you start, only because then you're talking about cultivating relationships with board members, maybe with your board members, cultivating relationships with their board members. That's a long-term process. It's not going to happen overnight. But you can understand that it can happen that way, and you want to be aware of that. Don't be intimidated by it because it doesn't accept applications. Just make sure the rest of your organization fits within their priorities, that you are geographically located where they fund. Take a look at their 990. Make sure that they are truly funding organizations that are similar to yours, maybe in the same area as yours. Maybe they're not funding, say, a food bank in California, but they're funding food banks in other states, and they say that they fund in California. It's not inappropriate to call them and ask, hey, you know, I've looked here. You say you fund food banks. You say that you fund in California, but you're not funding anyone in California. How do you feel about me applying for our project, which is in California and is a food bank? It can start a good conversation with a funder. And we'll talk about those conversations a little bit more in the future. So this is a sample of a funder profile off of the Foundation Center. And this, I will say right off the bat, if you are beginning with grant writing, and which it's my understanding that most of you are, foundations are the way to start. They're the simplest applications, they're the cleanest, they're the quickest, they're the least time intensive, and they typically have the fewest strings attached. And so as you're getting your feet wet in the grant writing world, foundations is where to start. And so the Foundation Center, it really is my favorite resource for searching for potentials. And so I pulled up Weingart Foundation. I'm going to guess that all of you are eligible for this grant. They're a local funder. They're based in LA. They fund in Riverside County, and they fund, if you are serving an underserved population, basically they're your funder. I mean, you'll want to read everything, but they're a really good generic funder for me to use in this realm. But you'll see contact information, their website, and you'll see right on the front paragraph here all their 990s, and you can look back all the way to 2002. When I'm researching a funder and I've seen their profile and I really like it, I usually will go back 2 or 3 years on a 990 and read through, and I will show you an example of that 990 upcoming here in a minute of what you're looking for. But basically, you're going to be looking at who they're giving money to and how much they're giving and for what programs. This can be helpful when you're looking at a 990 because it will show you, are they giving to, maybe they're only giving to 5 organizations each year. And of those organizations, they're giving the same amount every single year, and they're never bringing in a new organization. That might be good information for you to have as you're basing, is this funder worth my time? Because the reality is it's an investment of your time and your resources to submit an application to a particular foundation. And so you want to make sure that you're making a good investment and not wasting your time or wasting their time. And so if you've noticed that trend, you might do a little bit more digging, maybe look at their board of directors and see that their board of directors is maybe they're all family members. Maybe this is a family foundation and they all have the same last name and they have supported the same groups for the last 6 or 7 years, and maybe they're all based around a particular geographic region. One way to easily identify that is to see that it's a family foundation, and maybe they're based in Chicago, and they are funding maybe a YMCA camp, a particular theater, like an arts theater, performing arts theater, maybe a local college, and the American Cancer Society. If they're continuing to fund those same agencies year after year after year, and maybe that YMCA is growing into an after-school high school drama club, maybe you're going to start noticing these are personal interests, and the foundation is just a way for the family to collect and distribute their money in a cleaner fashion. Probably not your best investment of time. And so that's where doing research on a donor can really be helpful in noticing that they are either a good investment or they're not a good investment. And if I see something like what I just described, I'll usually chalk it up to probably not worth my time, even though they'll say that they'll fund nationally. They're just simply putting that on their blanket statement in case one of their board members chooses that they want to fund an agency in California. But the reality is they're funding all in Chicago. They're not worth my time. So the rest of this profile sheet will show you their giving limitations. For this particular funder, it has been updated. They now do fund in San Diego County. But, you know, as far as the Inland Empire goes, they are funding Riverside and San Bernardino. If you look at their purpose and activities, support for community and social services, education, healthcare with a strong emphasis on programs for children and youth. That's changed a little bit for them, not by much, but they really have added in the component of the underserved and at-risk. So they're really concerned with individuals that are poverty-stricken and that have severe needs within the community. Those are the types of programs that this particular agency is interested in. You'll also see a little bit further down the types of support. And you'll see some of the types of support that we talked about today. Now you'll notice the top two, building and renovation and capital campaigns. They are defining it a little bit differently. So in this particular instance, if you are renovating a facility, you're not going to go after capital campaigns. You're going to go after building and renovation. They also have an equipment. So I'm going to guess that their capital campaign is going to focus on greater things, maybe like the building of an endowment, things like that. This is a perfect way to start a conversation with a funder to have them clarify that. What do they mean by capital campaign? Before you pick up that phone call, pick up that phone to make that phone call, though, check them out online, make sure you've done your research, make sure that you've familiarized yourself with their past grantees and things like that. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a little bit. So this is the 990 that I was talking about. And this is where you're going to see, I did not pick the Weingart Foundation for this example because they give so many millions of dollars. It was such a long document. I picked a smaller one. So you can see at the top, it's the Patrick and Robin Van Dale Family Foundation. And this is who they gave money to in this particular tax year, 2008. And they gave $203,738. And you can see all of their support was given for general support. You can see where they're located. They gave to the Grove Church. They gave to the St. Andrews Newman Center, USC. That's an interesting change. Riverside Life Services, Woodcrest Christian School, and the Congregation of the Resurrection in Chicago, Illinois. That is kind of, if you're looking at that, it's kind of off from their other giving. That's at the point, it is a family foundation. It is at that point I might go take a quick peek at who their board members are and where they're located. on the profile, because it might be that one of their board members is in Chicago and maybe attends that particular church. This document can be really helpful in if this organization listed they support religious organizations, secondary education, and human services, and you're a human services agency, this is not one that I would recommend that you go after. If you are a religious institution or a secondary education facility, I would say maybe, because of the type of funding that they're actually giving to. If you look historically at this foundation and look at these are the similar groups that they're giving funding to over the years, they don't have a huge focus on human services. They have a greater focus on post-secondary education and religious services. This also helps you define what is a good range to be beginning the conversation with a funder as to what to request, how much to request. You can see that they're kind of all over the board. They're $1,000 in two different organizations, anywhere from $13,000 to $75,000. It might be reasonable to begin the conversation of would it be all right if we requested $5,000. So the next type of grant that you can look for is state grants. The state of California isn't giving too much these days unless it is pass-through funding. And there is a lot of pass-through funding right now. If you're looking straight to the state of California for state of California-based funding, it's not going to happen. But there's a lot of funds that the state of California has to funnel through from the federal government and give out to agencies. And so there can be quite a few different funding potentials here. One of the things that I recommend is just the straight-up State of California website. I think it's the best and cleanest source for funds. Grants.gov is the obvious choice for looking for government grants. It's not my favorite. I don't find it to be user-friendly at all, and I have a hard time navigating that site. That's just a personal struggle that I have on that particular site. I think the State of California site is much easier and cleaner to use and to navigate through. When I'm looking for funding, I look specifically to a specific department or office. So maybe the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, all the different types of departments, and looking specifically at their funding. I do believe that the State of California has a link that you can sign up and have future grants emailed to you as they become available. And if that's the case, that makes it very easy for you to go on and kind of sign on, and then you're not having to constantly look over state websites. The last one on that page was eCivis. That one is subscription-based. I have access to it. I have access to it through a client, so I don't have too much information on how to subscribe to it. I know that it is much less expensive for nonprofits than it is for an agency like mine, because I am not a nonprofit. But they're a good resource as well. I really like their site. But this is the State of California site. It's from a while ago, so it's going to look a little different now. But you can see the different types of grants that they have available in the different breakdowns. And so you'll see health. If you maybe provide alcohol rehabilitation or drug rehabilitation to youth, health might be a good area for you to look in. In agriculture is where I would say agriculture and health are where you're going to see most of the for-profit funding. I don't think that really applies to anybody here. But if you were to maybe starting a milk campaign, or maybe the effects of a particular chemical fed to cows in the production of milk, ultimately it does have a public benefit, but there could be a for-profit company wanting to provide those services. These are the areas that you would find those things in. But again, I don't think that really applies to anybody here today. Federal government grants. These are the grants that most people talk about. These are the grants that can range in the millions of dollars, and that I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that these are the grants that people hear about and that think, oh, I'm going to start a nonprofit and I'm going to get $3 million to do the job that I want to do. These are the hardest funds to come by. If you are not politically connected, it does help to be politically connected, but there are a lot of requirements, there are a lot of restrictions, and there is a lot of reporting. When it comes to federal or foundation funds, the reporting is pretty minimum. And what I mean by that is at the end of your grant period, or at the beginning of your grant period, let's start there, you sign a contract with the foundation that says we're going to give you $50,000 to provide at-risk mentoring services to youth during this specific period of time. You sign it, they sign it, and they send you a check. And at the end of that period of time, you have to provide a report back to them, showing them how you spent the money, where you spent the money, how many people were served, and remember those measurement and criteria, evaluation criteria? That's when those are all going to come into play, because they're going to ask you, how did you achieve your project goals, and what success did you have? And you have to typically write, maybe a 1-2 page document with some questions, responses to questions that they've asked, attach some financials, and you're good to go and you're done. With state and federal government grants, federal is more complicated than state. The reporting mechanisms are significantly more complex. Most federal government grants require you to report on a quarterly basis. Many times they are reimbursement-based, and so they require you to spend the money prior to receiving the money. And any time that you're dealing with government grants, you want to be aware of that. CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grant, things like that, and many federal grants require you to expend the funds and then be reimbursed. If you have the flexibility of funds to do that, it's a wonderful benefit. If you don't, it may not be worth your investment of time to receive that grant if you don't have the capacity to spend the money and be reimbursed for the money. So in searching for federal grants, I use a variety of different sites. Again, the eCivis site, I compare the eCivis site to the Foundation Center or the Foundation Directory site, except that the eCivis site is more for, they do have some private funders, which are your corporations, foundations, things like that, but they focus more on the government grants. So state, local, city, federal governments, all of those are going to be more heavily found in the eCivis. The Foundation Directory doesn't cover those at all. Grants.gov is again an option. It's not my favorite option. I don't care for that one. The Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, that website is very, very helpful. And what I really like about that site is that they publish their document once a year, their catalog, and it details all the different grants they're going to be giving out through the whole year. And so you can go into your category and you can review what's coming up. So if you provide art services or maybe arts education or maybe like rehabilitation programs through the arts, you could look at agencies that deal with the arts, such as the National Endowment for the Arts, and look at what funding they're going to have in this upcoming year and be able to position yourself to apply for those funds. And what I mean by positioning yourself is to be able to identify, okay, this is going to be due in November, so if you're looking at it today in June, you have a little bit of time to consider your application. Contact the program manager and begin conversations with them, such as you're interested in applying, you saw the grant application, what specifically are they looking for that's not listed in the application. Just begin a conversation. Many times those conversations will happen by email because all documentation will have to be available to the public. It's a public document. Sometimes you'll get a program manager to be able to just speak with you off the cuff. And when that happens, you really can gain a lot of knowledge and a lot of education in how to frame your application and how to frame your narrative and all of that. The other thing that you can do is if you know that an opportunity is coming up, you can also request previously awarded applications. I do believe that agencies charge for that service. I don't believe it's that expensive, but they are public documents. And so you can request them, and it's not an abnormal thing to do, but you can request them and look over them and see a project that maybe was funded in the last funding cycle that you could glean a couple of items of languages they're using, who they're serving, and how they're matching in or meeting in with the department or agency's funding priorities, and it can be really, really helpful. So in looking at the federal sites, this is one of the ways that you can research as well outside of those other sites is to go directly to the department. So this one is the Department of Justice, and look at their funding opportunities and be able to look at a specific agency or department that is within your service realm, and maybe sign up for a newsletter or an email blast for when they have upcoming grants. Another one is local grants. Check with your local city and your local county. Sometimes there are grant opportunities available. It's also a really good time to have conversations with your elected city officials and county supervisors. Even if it's not going to result in you getting a check for your agency, it can really be helpful for your organization to have relationships with these people, because you could maybe get a letter of support from a local county supervisor or from a city council member. It's just going to further legitimize your agency, and it'll help a funder see that you are recognized within your community as a high-quality service provider if you have maybe your county supervisor or other elected officials supporting you. And so even though it may not result in funding, it's still a good thing to have in your arsenal in going after other grant funds. And you, again, can consider other funding mechanisms. That CDBG is the Community Development Block Grant, and the Neighborhood Stabilization Program Funds. That one has ended with the end of the economic development agencies, but both of those funding mechanisms were reimbursement-based, and so I had many clients that were able to take advantage of that, and it was very, very helpful for them. But just make sure that if you are looking at a reimbursement-based system that you can, in fact, expend the funds before you sign up for a grant like that. Another source of funding, sometimes it'll be called a grant, sometimes it'll be called a donation, is through corporations. Many corporations, especially larger corporations, Verizon, banks fall into this category. Big retail funders or big retail locations, maybe Walmart, Target, Costco, they all give back to the community. Sometimes they call it a donation, sometimes they call it a grant. But consider what's in your backyard. Do you have any corporations headquartered near you or that have a big presence within your community? Here in the Murrieta-Temecula area, we have Abbott is based and has a huge facility out in Temecula, and they do funding. And so for the agencies that are located in this valley, it makes sense for us to approach them. Where maybe if you're based in Riverside, it doesn't make sense to approach them, but maybe you have other agencies that have a huge presence and do quite a bit of business, and that have employees that are, working and living within that community that they would want to support. So take a look at what's around you from a corporation standpoint. In considering someone like Walmart, do you have a Walmart in your city? If there's not a Walmart within 100 miles of you, they may not be your best option. But if you've got a Walmart, they have local funding, and it's a good opportunity. So when looking at a corporation, if you're looking at the actual foundation, it's a lot easier. But sometimes you'll have to put in like the Wells Fargo Foundation into your search browser, or the Walmart Foundation, to be able to look at their funding priorities and their process and requirements. If it's just on their corporate website, sometimes it's found in the About Us section. Other times it can be found in community investments or social responsibility, different categories like that, where you can find out how a corporation is supporting their local community. If you really just can't find anything, you could contact the local office of a corporation or of an agency and just ask them if they make donations, and if so, how you come about the information in order to request that. So Walmart is one of them that I was talking about. The Walmart Foundation, they have a local giving program which funds up to $2,500. They have a state giving program if you serve a region. So a region would be like Southern California, not like the city of Riverside. That's not a big enough area. If you served all of Inland Empire, that would be a bigger area, or the entire state. And then they have their national giving program, which is agencies that are nationally based throughout the United States and have multiple facilities over many states. And you can get the information right online. Most of these agencies, most of the corporate foundations do have online submitting requirements. And I find those a little bit harder to do than in paper form, only because you're limited by how many characters you have and how long you have to answer the questions. And so you have to make sure that you're really concise. But there is a benefit to that. And funders don't want 15 pages on the history of your organization. Keep it concise and keep it specific and keep it relevant. And unless they're specifically asking, they don't want to know what happened in 1972. Just give them a brief overview, the highlights of your organization, and the big points. Wells Fargo is another corporate sponsor that you can look on for how to apply for grants. And so in the corporations category does fall all of your banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, Union Bank, Fidelity Bank, all of those different banks that we have here. Just keep in mind you're going to want to apply to banks that have a presence within your community. So if you're a community that's not really serviced by U.S. Bank, you don't have a U.S. Bank within 20, 30 miles of you, or whom you serve, it may not be the best option for you. And then the last source that I think a lot of people tend to forget about, especially when a grant campaign is starting, is your individual donors. Don't forget to continue to cultivate these. Historically, this group of funding, this group of funders continues year after year. As long as they can continue to support the agency, they don't typically, there isn't typically a lot of turnover in this particular area. And so make sure that you're staying in communication with them, either with newsletters, Facebook interaction, social media, things like that, direct mail, fundraisers, things like that. This also can be where individual donor cultivation comes in to play with your resource development director, where if you have a good relationship with an individual who makes large donations, don't let that kind of go by the wayside because you're looking into grants right now. You want to make sure that you're keeping your funding sources coming from a variety of different sources, so that if one happens to go away, such as maybe you have an average of $500,000 a year in grants and you've had a reduction down to $250,000, that your agency doesn't have to close its doors because you have funding from other sources that can help you survive. And we talked about Once you have identified those funders and you've done research into those funders and you feel as though they are a good fit for you, what's next? And making that first phone call to a funder. If it is at all possible to not start with paper, that is better for your agency. And so you feel as though you have found a funder, you've looked at their 990s, you feel as though you understand who they're funding, what their funding priorities are, where they're funding, and you feel as though you are within those boundaries. It's not unreasonable to put together a list of questions to call and ask them. The one thing I would recommend that you don't do is call and ask them things that are very easily, readily available on their website, their due dates, who they've funded in the past. Things that you can answer, don't call and ask, because all that's going to do is show a funder that you really haven't spent any time investing in them. And it really is a partnership. They're making an investment in you, and you're providing the services, which ultimately help them accomplish their priorities. And so it really is a partnership between the two of you. And in order for that to be made right from the beginning, it needs to be both ends have an interest. And so you need to take an interest in the funder. So if you see a trend maybe in their giving to where they're only taking on 1 or 2 new agencies a year, it would be appropriate to, instead of just asking, do you take on new agencies, to be able to say, hey, I've noticed as I'm researching your 990s that you're funding the same 10 or 12 agencies every year for roughly the same amount. What are your policies on new agencies, and do we have a chance on receiving funds? And how can we better increase our chances? It shows that you've done your research. It shows that you have an interest in them. You understand their priorities, and you still feel like you're a good fit. You've now sparked their ear, and they may be more willing to speak with you about those sorts of things. It is at this point where you're going to want to clarify the different types of support that are available or that they're offering. Make sure that your project fits under what they're considering that type of support. And then you can start to talk about specifically what they hope to accomplish in their funding priorities that you can work into your application, as long as those are already things that you are in the same arena with. If their goal is to serve a population that struggles with cancer or that does cancer research, and you're providing after-school resources for kids, you're not going to do well with that funder, because after-school programs for kids is not their focus. It's not their priority. And you don't want to try to manufacture a project in order just to get funding from them, because ultimately, yes, you may get funding, but who are you going to serve? How is that going to fit in with your mission? It just isn't a good match. After that initial phone call, if there's a positive response, that you can prepare a proposal or a letter of inquiry. The difference between the two is that a letter of inquiry it's like a mini proposal. It is simply a letter asking if you can submit a full proposal. The beauty of a letter of inquiry is that you do not invest a huge amount of time. You may invest 2 or 3, maybe 4 hours in a letter of inquiry, versus if you were to submit a full proposal to them, you may be looking at more like 12 to 15 hours. And it's really nice to be able to invest a smaller amount of time. If the answer is going to be no, we're not interested, I'd rather only invest a few hours versus far more hours into my efforts with them. And so with a letter of inquiry, you're going to be specific about why you feel like you're a good fit for their organization. If you were invited to submit a proposal, what project it would be for, and how much you would request. On a proposal, it's more in-depth. You're going to give far more information on your projects, your goals, your evaluation criteria, your project budget. But the biggest thing that I can help you understand is that you have to follow directions very carefully. In grant writing, you have to understand that your application is going to be on the desk with 100 other applications of agencies that are just as worthy as yours. And if you can't follow directions by staying within the page limits or keeping the margins that they're asking for, even down to the font size, I've seen applications where you have to have a specific font and a specific font size. Honestly, I feel like a lot of times that only exists to show an agent to make their job a little easier. Because if you can't follow the directions of how they're asking you to respond, how are you going to adequately handle their investment within your agency? And so you make it really easy for them to simply take your application and set it aside in the trash, because they have 99 other applications that have followed the directions. And so don't make the investment of all of your time only to be thrown out because we didn't specifically follow directions. Also, focus on how the organization is accomplishing the mission statement through the projects. And that goes back to really having a clear mission statement of your projects accomplish your mission statement. And if they don't, something needs to change. In looking at your organization's projects and your mission, how do they fall in line with the foundation's mission and the foundation's funding priorities and the foundation's goals? Tie those in together. Because if you've done your research, then you have found that you are a good fit for this foundation, that you can and that you do accomplish their priorities. So for instance, one of the focuses for Weingart Foundation is to serve impoverished youth. So a food bank in Lake Elsinore that they have a Backpacks for Kids program, and they send kids, elementary school kids, home with backpacks full of food who are on the federal free lunch program. That's very specifically serving impoverished youth, and so with basic needs. And so that organization fits right in line with helping the Weingart Foundation serve an impoverished population of children through this project. And you have to look at the foundation as making an investment into your agency. They're spending their money to accomplish what they want to accomplish, but they're using you to do it. And that is how you have to look at it from their perspective. And so you really want to sell how your organization accomplishes what they want to accomplish. I understand that you have your own passions and your own mission, but if you've done your research well, the funder that you have found has the same as you. And then in a proposal, you are going to give specific information about the project and specifically how the funding would be spent if it was awarded. And then I just listed here the general layout of an LOI. I always get asked this question as to how it should look. I'm also asked how long it should be. I don't like to see LOIs longer than 2 pages. Sometimes it's appropriate. Most of the time I see 2 pages as the max. Sometimes I see 1 page as the max. And so it just depends on the project and how concise you can make it. But the LOI is a concise document. You need to be short, you need to be brief, and you need to cover a lot of information in a short amount of time. And so you are going to provide a brief intro, what you do, who you are, where you are, your mission statement, what projects you have, what you would ask for, how much you would ask for, and contact information in your closing remarks. That's it. You are not providing anything else. It is just a sample of your organization. And it's not until you get to the proposal that you really get the full view of your agency. And again, on your grant application or on your proposal, no matter however way you'd like to look at it, the biggest thing is follow directions and confirm your deadlines. Those are firm deadlines. In I have been writing proposals both for the private sector and the public sector for, I'm going to say, 13, 14 years, maybe 15 years. I have seen once a deadline be only once, in all of those times, in all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications that I personally have worked on, I have seen once where a deadline was flexible, and that was only because their grant writer was in the hospital. And it was a funder who had funded them in the past. They had a great relationship with. They understood the personal circumstances, and they allowed an exception. I cannot at all emphasize how rare that is to you. So make sure that you're getting your deadline in, or your proposal in on time with that deadline. It's non-flexible, especially if you're a new agency. Your application could be great. It could be the best in the world. It could be a repeat funder. This particular circumstance was very, very rare. I've had many repeat funders say, no, you missed the deadline. We can't. See you next year. They have limited funds. Everybody has limited funds these days. You know that in looking at your income over the past couple of years, yours has gotten smaller too. And so everybody's having to be stricter and more specific in their giving. And if you can't make the deadline, most of the time it's a really easy way for them to say no to you, because they have to say no to so many worthy agencies. And then what I like to do is, I know that I've done all my research on a funder, I understand who they are, and right before I sit down and write, right before I'm beginning my application, I like to reread the guidelines, make sure I didn't miss anything, and familiarize myself with their mission statement and their goals. And then simply fill out the forms and answer what they're asking for. If you don't know, get help. Ask other people to help you. How that can be accomplished is maybe seeking professional help through an agency like the NRC. If you can establish peer relationships with other agencies, it can be a great opportunity for you to have a relationship with another grant writer, maybe through like the Grant Professional Association or the Association of Fundraising Professionals. If you're involved in agencies like that, you develop peer relationships, and you can call upon that peer in another organization who's working on the same item as you, and they may be able to understand the question and help guide you a little bit better. So peer relationships can be really helpful in that avenue. And then these are some of the documents that we talked about today that could possibly be required. I will say the last two, program brochures and news clippings, keep these. Always keep these. If you have them electronically, it's even better. But don't attach them unless they say it's okay to attach them. Other things that I've seen attached to applications are copies of DVDs. If you have maybe, I worked with a canine support group a while back, and they had a PBS special, and that of course they had copies of that, and so it was a really great introduction to their agency because it was a recorded program. Or if maybe like a marketing or an introduction video has ever been taken of your agency, those can be helpful, but only include them if the foundation says that it's okay. Most of the time they will say do not attach additional items, and if they say that, follow the rules. They don't want it. It will go straight in the trash, and they may even throw out your application. So only attach things that they say it's okay to attach. So now I'm going to take a look. Let's see what our time frame is. We have about an hour, so we have a ton of time for questions. And I'm going to take a look and see what we have in questions that have been typed. If anyone wants to unmute, we can do that as well. But let me see what we have for questions. I don't have any questions. So if you have any specific...
Unmuted. Muted.
Okay, I'm back. I find that we have a small group today, and so I find that when you ask specific questions in relation to a specific application that you're working on or specific to your agency, it can really be of benefit to everyone else, not only for you to get the answer, but it gives a real concrete example for other people attending too. So we're going to give it a few minutes to see if there are any questions. And Kyra has sent me a note that says that we can look at an electronic grant submission that they got funding for last month. So we'll probably be taking a look at that as well in a few minutes if we don't have any questions. So I'm going to just give it a few minutes here. Okay, Jeanette, I'm looking for any examples of measurements. Okay, so we'll talk about those a little bit more. I hate to preface this with it depends on the funder, but it really does depend on the funder and how they are asking for the question. But for the most part, when you are looking for evaluation criteria and evaluation measurement items, you're going to start with goals. What is your goal? What are you choosing? What are you resolving with your project? So maybe your project is that you want to provide services for children after school through mentoring and maybe like a financial literacy component, something. Let's go with that, financial literacy for at-risk youth. You're talking about the junior high, high school range. And so you're making your statement of need. And so you're talking about this particular population of kids. Maybe they're on the federal free lunch program, which is a great way to document family income without collecting family income, to be able to make the statement of what's the need within the community. You're dealing with kids from low-income families. Maybe there's two parents working, and they're in daycare all the time, and so they don't have as much mentoring and guidance as they need. And so after-school programs are really helping to meet that need within the community or within their population group, within their families. And you're dealing with histories of violence, abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, things like that. And your agency is looking to change those outcomes for those kids. And so your project is to provide after-school mentoring and homework assistance with a financial literacy component to help break the break the cycle of poverty and set kids up for self-sufficiency. And so your goal is ultimately to help kids live productive and healthy lives independent of public assistance, to be self-sufficient, and to break the patterns that have plagued their generations, of drug and alcohol abuse and things like that. And so you have to break that down. That's a very big goal, and you're not having measurement examples that are going out 20 years. So what can you accomplish within a year? And so you're going to want to look at, okay, so in providing these after-school programs, you're helping them with homework. So you are helping them succeed in school. So you're going to be concrete with a goal. We want to serve 100 youth within the 2013-2014 academic school year with after-school homework support and tutoring. That's perfect. Then what are the results of that going to be? So your measurement or evaluation criteria is going to be the when and the how. So you are going to serve 100 youth through after-school programs in the 2013-2014 academic year. There's your goal. How are you measuring it? You're going to measure that through maybe attendance sheets, pre and post surveys on grades, maybe what their exiting grade was for the previous school year, and then what their exiting grade is for their 2013-2014 academic school year through self-reporting. And so you can get have them just fill out a little survey. What were your average grades? Are you a A's and B's? Are you a B's and C's? Are you a C's and D's? How many classes are you failing? Have them fill out that same survey at the end of their school year, and you have some comparison data to work with to be able to show whether your program was a success or not. You can also measure if you are providing financial literacy. That can be trickier in a young population because they're not self-sufficient. They don't work and support themselves and pay their rent, so it's hard to determine if they understand self-sufficiency. But what you can do is take a pre and post survey or pre and post test of their financial knowledge. How many of them have savings accounts? Do they understand maybe what, if you were to give them some financial concepts, do they understand it? Do they understand how credit cards work? And through your financial literacy training, at the end of that, be able to ask them again, through understanding the importance of this, maybe even with an incentivized savings program component, how many of them have taken action? How many of them understand concepts better than they did before? Those are all qualitative and quantitative measuring capacities. Sometimes it's harder to measure. It's harder to measure things that aren't necessarily concrete. And I'm speaking like in providing mentoring or financial literacy training, it's not as though it's super easy to track that sort of information. So you have to track things that you can track. What are outcomes that you want to have happen? Maybe out of 100 kids participating, you want to see 5 of them start a savings account and invest $20. I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be a huge amount. But set things that you know that you can reasonably accomplish and that you can reasonably track. So I hope that that helps in looking at examples of measurement. If I can be more specific, please don't hesitate to ask. Do we have any other questions? Kyra. Oh, and I have one more question from Jeanette before I see if Kyra can show us that online application. And Jeanette is asking, how often do you need to report to a funder? And that answer is going to be based on what the funder has asked for. If the funder is not asking for reporting, you definitely want to collect your data because they are going to ask. Even if they don't ask, you want to submit a report. Because if they're asking for quarterly reports, you need to submit quarterly reports. If they're asking for biannual or annual, you want to submit them in the time frames that they're asking them for. If they're not asking for an end report, they just give you the funds and they're done and they don't want to know what happened, it's a wonderful opportunity at the end of the grant cycle is to be able to say, okay, we understand you didn't ask for a final report, but we're so excited about our results that we want to be able to share them with you. The real reason that you want to do that is to not only build legitimacy for your agency and build a reputation for your agency, it's an opportunity to kind of be opening the door to future grants, to future funding mechanisms. And so you can say that I know that you didn't submit a report request, but we wanted to share this information with you. We said that we were going to serve 100 youth, and we served 125. You said that you wanted to be able to increase children's grades or see a decrease in negative behaviors. And not only did we see a decrease of negative behaviors, but we saw an increase of positive behaviors. And we wanted to share our data with you because they were a part of your success. And you really want to highlight on that. And be able to engage in conversation with the funder to develop a relationship so that you continue to have them consider giving you grant funding. So I hope that that I hope that that answers that question. I have a question from, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Avis, that asks what the next class teaches, what a grant actually looks like, and what goes into it. And yes, the next level of grant writing does cover in-depth sections of a grant proposal and how to define the different sections, such as how to write your statement of need, how to research for your statistics for your data to prove that your statement of need is accurate. You can say that you have a need within a community, but unless you can really prove it, it's really just your observation. And so we talk about how to collect the data to prove that there really and truly is a need that is identifiable within your community. We talk about how to put together your project budget in more specific and more specific sections of the grant application. So I have a question here for Robert. Do you know of any grants for homeless vets? There are several grant opportunities serving the veteran population, and that's where I would recommend that you search for. You have two different categories in your searching that you can look for. You can look for organizations that support veterans, and just look for veterans, and then you can look for organizations that support homelessness and housing. Don't necessarily have to be organizations that support homeless veterans. I'm sure there will be some, but you can look, there's two different opportunities there for you, veterans and military, and then homeless and housing. So I would recommend that you kind of open up your field search in looking for two different sets of funders and see where they could maybe coincide. Let's see. I have a question from Danielle, and if there are no guidelines listed about the length of the LOI from the funder, how long should I make the LOI? Would 5 pages or more be too long for an LOI? I would say yes. I personally like to see LOIs no more than 2 pages. Remember, it is a letter of introduction or a letter of inquiry. It is simply the first step in your agency saying hello to a foundation, introducing yourself, introducing your agency, and asking if they might be interested in this particular project. If you're getting too long, it's looking more like a proposal, and you're not submitting a proposal, you're only submitting a letter of inquiry. And I know that that's really hard because it's really hard for me to cut it down to 2 pages. I want to say so much more. And I feel like, okay, I have them there, they're reading my letter. I want them to know everything. But you also want to follow, some reasonable protocol. And it is just a letter of inquiry. It's a brief overview. It's a quick glance. It's a yes or no right from there. So make sure that on that letter that you're concise, that you are specific, that you are clear, and that you are tying in how you're going to accomplish that foundation's or that funder's goals. I have a comment from Kyra here that says, it's my recommendation that anyone in a nonprofit leadership role have grant writing skills, as it is a constant job duty and a huge piece of running services. And honestly, I couldn't agree with that more. Any agency that really wants to have any sort of sustainability, their leadership, someone within their leadership does need to have some grant skills. Grant writing is not something that you spend 3 months on and then you're done for the year and it's done and over with and you never have to look at it again. It's an ongoing process. It's a lengthy process and it is an investment. I could say that your agency doesn't need grants, but the reality is that most agencies do. Most agencies cannot survive on just individual donations and fundraisers and things like that, and earned revenue. Some agencies can. I work with an agency who's working really hard to build in earned revenue. That's Habitat for Humanity, the way that their structure is set up. They're working really hard to be self-sufficient. It's very unusual in the nonprofit world to see that. It is somewhat possible, not entirely, but most agencies need grant writing as part of their, they need it as part of their process, as much as they need a strategic plan and as much as they need, preparing an annual budget. It's just part of their fundraising task. I have one from Corey. It says, my agency provides transitional housing to people in recovery, not necessarily from drugs and alcohol. What categories of funding would you suggest that I look under? So, transitional housing, I'm going to guess if you're dealing with transitional housing, you're dealing with matters of and I don't know exactly what you mean by a transitional housing. I'm going to scroll down and see if I can get more. No. I'm going to guess that you're dealing with matters of affordable housing. You're dealing with matters of mentoring. So those are areas that I would look. I would look under affordable housing, maybe even homelessness. I would, if you are dealing at all with drugs and alcohol, I would look at substance abuse. I would look at human services. You could be looking at homelessness in addition to that affordable housing, and you could be considering if you have any sort of financial literacy as a component of your program to help people make it from point A to point B. You could look in that way of workshops and financial literacy, life skills, things of that nature. I'm trying to think of other options for transitional housing other than affordable housing. You could look at again, the mentoring element of life skills, job training, job placement, interview preparations, things of that nature. The next question that I have is from, Corey, I'm sorry, you said that it is for homeless. So yes, I would say that you would be dealing with, I would look under affordable housing and homelessness. You might even be able to deal with independent living and self-sufficiency, categories like that. Those are kind of buzzwords that are happening right now in the grant world that can help you find grants that are specifically helping people become self-sufficient. And in addition to life skills and affordable housing mentoring, you might find some assistance through agencies that deal with hunger and food. You could specifically also look up homeless. So let's see, the last, I think that's the last question that I have at this very moment. I'm happy to answer more if there are any more. We'll give it a few more minutes, and if there's nothing more, then if Kyra wants to open it up and look at that electronic application, that could be a nice class.
Melissa, can you hear me?
You hear me?
Hold on.
I do have another question from Jeanette, and is there a cost to use the Foundation Center? I do pay a cost for myself because I have a subscription, but there is no cost if you use the Resource Center. And it is, I do see a note here with Kyra that it is appointment-based only, Monday through Friday, and you can contact Danielle directly at 951-329-4735.
Melissa, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. So I am going to make myself the presenter now and show my screen.
Sounds good.
so that we can look at a recent actual funded proposal that we just received last month.
Huh?
And I'm going to make this portion of the training kind of a dual purpose, showing a little bit more interactively how to research grants and what Foundation Center actually looks like in a live environment. And then I'll show you the funder that we found, the funder that we submitted to, an example of what the end product looked like. And
Great.
I'll do it as quickly as possible. Okay, so right now, can you see my screen?
But if you need me, I'm still here. Just holler for me.
Okay, so 1 second. So the Foundation Center directory, which is hosted by the Nonprofit Resource Center, I just want to reiterate, this is not information that you can just find by Googling. We actually host the website and pay to have certain capabilities here within our office. And a piece of the agreement is that we hold the password within the 4 walls of the organization. And that's why we ask for people to make an appointment so that we can kind of monitor the usage of it. And so this is the screen when you're in the user mode, what it looks like. It's a search screen. It's very, very user-friendly. And I keep my search very simple. I usually just have 2 or 3 fields filled out in order to give me the best search possible. And for this one particular grant that I was working on, I wanted to do it as a project grant, which, as Melissa stated earlier, is a grant where you can utilize the resources that you have within your organization to do a project or a new program. So the program that I had in mind, or the project that I had in mind, was related to safety and disaster. As we all know, we live in a community that has a high risk for earthquake and fires, and so I wanted to do some training to the nonprofit community related to earthquake preparedness and disaster preparedness. So in my search on the Foundation Center, I was able to put safety/disasters in the search field, and then, you know, obviously we're in California, and that's the geographic focus. I didn't want to see any grant makers that weren't currently accepting applications, so I made sure that that was checked. And then hit the search button and was able to pull up a pretty large list of funders. As you can see over here, there's 35 different funders nationally that fund California in relation to safety and disaster. So I went through all of these and pretty much did the research as far as limitations, and the match that I found was the Southern California Edison Company Contributions Program, which, as we know, is one of our big utility companies here. We pay them every month, and we have them on our budget every month, but they have a charitable arm. So SoCal Edison, they actually give back to the community. And that drives us to this page, which includes a profile, where they're located, a URL link, which shows more detail about their giving, and then what I call an at-a-glance snapshot. So the limitations are the first thing that I personally always read, because it'll tell you what they're not going to do, and it'll save you a lot of time on the front end. So basically it says they give in Southern California, and there's no support for any discriminatory, fraternal, religious, political. So in reading that, I checked off my list and recognized that I'm not any of those things, so I was able to move forward. And then the purpose and activities of their giving were listed here. It says they give to nonprofit organizations involved with education, the environment, public safety, preparedness, and civic engagement. So I thought that that would pretty much be in alignment with what I was trying to do, which again was going to be training programs for nonprofits as it relates to disaster preparedness. And then their fields of interest in their giving. So this is a list of their particular field of interest and what they're interested in giving as far as nonprofits providing services. So they're interested in the aging population and animals and wildlife and youth services. And then down here, of course, alphabetically is safety and disasters. It shows here what their geographic focus is, the types of support that they're willing to kind of engage in, and then their application guidelines, which I was able to actually find on their website, and their giving activities. So as I went to the website, which I'm not going to do right now, I found out that it was all an electronic process, which means we had to set up a username and a password and things like that, and then their electronic system saved the grant. So here is the actual hard copy grant, and it's not long. I applied for a small grant, which was $5,000, and it had very, very specific parameters on it, and I ended up printing out the electronic version and then scanning it so I could have it for future reference. But this is what the electronic grant looked like. So it asked very basic information, what the organization name is, any other names or acronyms. We recently changed our name, not recently, but almost 3 years ago, formerly known as the Volunteer Center, and then just logistic information such as address, zip codes, phone numbers, fax numbers, email addresses, our website address, which should be a red flag to you guys. They do check websites as far as content and to make sure that you're a legitimate organization. And that also asks for our mission statement, which, as you can see, I wrote out the mission statement and the vision statement for Community Connect, and then asked for our tax ID number and when we received our tax status. What age group does your organization target? We service all of Riverside County, so I put all there. And then this question, what program area does your organization target? That was actually a drop-down menu, so you only had like 5 things to choose from. And then it made us break down our overall ethnic demographic breakdown, which was a little difficult to gather those because we don't always ask racial information or ethnic information related to our services, but I was able to pull some stats from our sister program, which is our 211 program, to try to break it down as much as possible. And what I couldn't figure out, I based it on the Riverside County local population through the Department of Statistics. And then contact information is myself, because I was the one that was going to be the direct contact for the grant. So all of this, the first 29 questions, is all just very logistic information: phone number, address, website. Then it asks, are there any Edison employees on our board? Well, we did not have any Edison employees on our board, so I wasn't able to answer that. I just left that blank. And then what exactly I was requesting a cash grant. And they ask for you to title, like the name of your program or the name of your project. Disaster preparedness for the nonprofit leader is what I chose. Not a very spicy name, but direct and to the point. And then the amount that I was requesting, I found out on their website that their highest dollar amount that they were giving was $5,000, so I went ahead and asked for the largest amount. And then the yearly budget for the program that I was requesting for, and then our organizational annual operating budget, which we can cover these topics in a future class that gets more involved with budgets. But it asks, the funder then asked to please describe the project in detail, at which point I'm not going to read this word for word, but I was basically requesting $5,000 to be able to provide kits, disaster kits, to faith-based nonprofit leaders in the community. And I was actually leveraging a grant that I received to have a conference. So this was a $5,000 request to be able to train 35 nonprofit leaders and provide them with disaster kits. So within that $5,000, we actually have to purchase disaster kits, at which point we will hand them out at the conference. The statement of need, if you look right here, for anyone else who's writing grants, it's always important to think about your statement of need and identifying what the need is in the community and the reason why you're writing the grant. Clearly, there's a tremendous need for disaster preparedness because we sit on 3 major earthquake faults. So that was my particular need for this grant, is just kind of explaining to the funder where we're located in relation to the faults and what could happen as far as the extent of an earthquake and how serious it could be if and when it does happen. And then the program detail was asking more specifically about the Nonprofit Resource Center and our history and the types of seminars that we host and the types of projects that we've been involved in the past. And then, as Jeanette asked earlier, how we would develop our outcomes and measurements, and I put that we would do quantitative and qualitative measurements through evaluations after the training. So we would show that there was some type of increase in knowledge of what to do in the event of an emergency, and also that the person who took the training, that we'd have some type of receipt that they got a disaster kit. So that was a very small project grant, and fortunately we were actually awarded the grant. So I wanted to be able to share, because I know a lot of people are visual learners. So I hope that you were able to benefit from that. I am going to go ahead and turn it back over to Melissa now. Melissa, are you there?
I am.
Great.
I think it's very helpful to see an application that has, especially one that's been awarded. One of the things that caught my eye when Kyra was doing that was collecting that ethnicity information. And that can be really tricky when you don't collect it. And exactly how Kyra has captured it is a great way to do it, because we have, I'm going to show my screen again here. We can get to it in a variety of different ways. You can use, if you're serving a youth population, it's a good idea you can use school district ethnicity profiles and ethnicity information and breakdowns. You can use the U.S. Census Bureau. The site that Kyra had mentioned can work. There's lots of different ways to collect that information, even if you don't. And in that same kind of focus, you can collect information on income based on property. If you don't collect financial information, you can still define a population based on need. So if you have a large percentage of families in the school districts that are on the federal free lunch program, there's an income component that makes a child eligible for that. So if they are eligible for that, you can very easily say that, you know, a family is struggling with poverty. It's an easy leap to make. So I don't know that I have any more new questions. I do hope that I've answered everything for everyone today. And again, if you have any specific, maybe a grant that you're working on, or one that you're looking at, I'd be happy to answer specific questions. I do have a question from Avis regarding the foundation directory online, or the Foundation Center online, and there is no cost to use the Foundation Center at Community Connect. You just have to make an appointment, which is, I will tell you guys, it's a great resource, and you should definitely make use of it. I do have another question here from Jeanette. What happens if you state that you are not going to help the number of people and do not meet that number? So I think I understand your question as you say that you're going to help 100 people and you only serve 75. It happens, and I'm hoping that that's the right question here. That's the one I'm going to answer first. So if you have said that you're going to serve 100 people and you end up only serving 75, when you have to report back the facts. So if you only served 75, you only served 75. So that's what you have to report back, and you need to answer the why. Why did you only serve 75? What happened? Did you have a staffing turnover that maybe caused a little bit of confusion or a lack of ability to provide services? Is there a component there where maybe you were using, I'm going to go back to that financial literacy for kids, maybe you were providing services through the use of volunteers at school sites, and maybe the schools provided that for free and they did not charge for you to come in and provide those services after school, and halfway through the year they have a change of heart and they say, nope, we have to charge you $500 a week for you to use our classrooms, and your program couldn't afford that. And so it's a reasonable problem that your agency may have in providing services, and it would explain why you would have to maybe take a step back and look at how else you're going to serve that population a different way that you could maybe provide services to them. But all in all, you have to be honest. Take the opportunity to say if it maybe was a mistake on your part of not researching. Maybe you thought you were going to get to use the schoolroom for free and you didn't end up getting to. If it is your fault, explain what was learned and what won't happen again next time. If it was a certain beyond your...
sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Melissa?
Yes.
I just wanted to interject because we've had this happen to our program as well, and I just want to say most funders are not punitive in their funding because you didn't meet your outcomes. Most of the time, grant makers have a certain amount of funding that they need to grant make, and they do not want that money back. What they will do is if you in the second year that you're requesting the funds, while the first year you weren't able to meet the outcomes, I'm just giving an example, what they will do is have you relook at those numbers and probably have a person from the foundation or the funder meet with you, and the next time that you're funded, if they proceed with funding, then you'd have to lower the numbers in order to get the funding. So that has been my personal experience with not meeting outcomes. Most funders are not punitive related to outcomes, most of the ones that I've been affiliated with. It's just that when you go to request funding again, you have to put some thought and basis into your new request and take the prior year's numbers into consideration. So I just wanted to interject, and I hope that's helpful.
Yes. And I do want to add, though, is I don't believe that funders are punitive either. Most funders aren't, stuck in the rules that if you don't absolutely meet your criteria, we want the money back. Most of them don't want that. They understand that things happen and that life happens. But I do want to say that you do want to be careful to make sure that you're spending the money the way that you say that you are spending the money, because that can create a situation where you have to give the money back. So, for instance, you say that you're going to spend the money on that after-school mentoring program for youth, but instead you bought a new copy machine that is just used for the office. An agency can request that you give the money back. And so you do want to make sure that you are spending the money in the proper way on the items that you said that you were going to spend them on. I haven't ever seen an agency ask for money back because you didn't meet all of your outcomes, but I have heard of agencies asking for money back when you didn't spend them on anything related. And if you're really going to have a problem where the program's just not going to be able to happen in the way that you thought it was going to, and it's going to significantly affect outcomes, contact the funder. Let them know. Let them know what's going on and offer the balance of the grant maybe to go back, and let them guide that conversation. So we still have a few minutes if there are any questions, any more specifics that we can help with.
Thank you, Melissa, for your time and your facilitation of the workshop today.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and log everyone off unless anyone has questions. If you do, you have Melissa's email. We are going to email out everyone an electronic evaluation as well as a copy of this PowerPoint. And if you would like a copy of the SoCal Edison grant, just email me personally, kyra@connectriverside.org, and I will send you a copy of that as well. Okay, so thank you, everyone, and we're going to go ahead and log out now. We appreciate your attendance.
The organizer